It's a celebration of America's freedom. Welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. The Mark Scaringi Show is your place for a weekly discussion on making America great again. The important political and legal issues of the day, a celebration of the Constitution, and traditional American values. Mark is a practicing attorney, a former senatorial candidate, a Donald J. Trump-endorsed delegate, and a defender of the Constitution. His goal? To put America first. And now, celebrating America's freedoms, here's attorney Mark Scaringi.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. And this is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. Welcome my listeners here on WHP 580 and iHeartRadio. And remember, you can download the iHeartRadio app and you can listen to the show wherever you are and whenever you like. If you'd like to listen to some of the prior podcasts of the show, read my biweekly column on Penn Live or in the Harrisburg Patriot News, or take a look at some great merchandise we have, you can look at the MarkScaringiShow.com website. And don't forget to subscribe to the Mark Scaringi Show on YouTube. You can follow me on Twitter at Mark Scaringi, on Facebook, and my new account on Instagram at Mark A. Scaringi. And welcome to our friends and followers on Harrisburg 100 Facebook Live. We're trying to do this Facebook Live in conjunction with live radio, and hopefully we'll maintain our connectivity so that you can comment live via Facebook, and we'll read your comments on the air. And you can also send comments via Twitter, or you can call in the old-fashioned way, 717-540-0580, and we'll put you on live, and you can ask a question, make a statement. The topic today are the 2020 Democratic presidential debates, where we have about 22 candidates who are all vying for the Democratic nomination to challenge incumbent President Donald J. Trump in his reelection bid for 2020. And the first round of the debates, the Democratic debates, just were completed in Miami, Florida. And we'll do a little recap of those debates. And then I want to hear from my listeners what their favorite debate moments were and who they think won the Democratic debates. They occurred in Miami, Florida, which, by the way, is about 70% Hispanic and a huge engine for Democratic voter turnout. And at the same time the debates were occurring, we had those photographs of Oscar Martinez, an Hispanic migrant, and his 23-month-old daughter, Valeria, lying lifeless on the edge of the Rio Grande River. They apparently died by drowning, attempting to swim the Rio Grande to get across the border from Mexico into the United States. It's a tragic death. It generated national news media attention and certainly got the attention of our Democratic presidential candidates who are vying for that nomination. Those deaths have become a meme in favor of stopping President Trump's border wall effort and in favor of efforts to open the border with Mexico. And so that's why I would think so many of the candidates, at least on the first night of the Democratic presidential debates, were speaking Spanish or trying to speak Spanish to relate to so many Spanish-speaking Hispanic voters in the United States. Several of the candidates advocated for open borders. And I think just about all of the candidates from both nights of the debate stated that their health care plans would provide health care coverage for those undocumented immigrants who are in our country illegally. And maybe one of my listeners will correct me if I'm wrong on that point, but I think all the Democratic presidents raised their hand in the affirmative to the question as to whether their health plans would cover undocumented immigrants. Now, before we get into the individual candidates and assess their performance, I'd like to point out that at the end of the first debate, the candidates were asked to identify the greatest geopolitical threat to the United States. Now, most of them cited either climate change or China. And apparently they forgot about how for the past 2 or 3 years, so many leaders in the Democratic Party and their spokespeople in the media have been screaming that Russia is our worst enemy and has been trying to destroy our democracy. So I found it a little bit ironic that Russia was not mentioned as a geopolitical threat to the United States, and I think that reveals the the hypocrisy of the Democrats and the media who spend so much time trying to convince Americans that Russia is our greatest enemy. They only are doing that because it advances their false narrative that President Trump is only president because of election interference by the Russian government, which well, you and I have known for about 3 years now is totally fake and fabricated. But finally, we have the report by Special Counsel Robert Mueller confirming that we were right from day one, that there is no such thing as collusion. There was no such thing as collusion between the Russian government and the Trump campaign to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. Another thing I wanted to point out just generally before we get into how the individual candidates performed during the Democratic debates, and I want to hear what your thoughts are. Who do you think had their best moments? Who do you think won? Who do you think lost? But what I thought was interesting with regard to the geopolitical threat question is that no one mentioned radical Islamic terrorism, or at least terrorism in general, as that which is posing the greatest geopolitical threat to the United States. And I thought that was just fascinating, particularly considering just a week or two before the debate, the FBI foiled an attempted bombing plot and arrested a Syrian refugee who allegedly planned to bomb a church in Pittsburgh in the name of the Islamic State. The man, Mustafa Musab al-Wimmer, a 21-year-old Pittsburgh resident, was born in Syria. He came to the United States as a refugee in 2016, and while here under refugee status, was attempting to formulate a plot to bomb a church in Pittsburgh in the name of the Islamic State. And how about, and this was just a week or two before the Democratic presidential debates in Miami of just a couple of days ago, when none of the candidates mentioned radical Islamic terrorism or even terrorism as the greatest geopolitical threat confronting the United States. And we don't even need to go through the large list of radical Islamist inspired terrorist attacks on U.S. soil against Americans in the preceding years, in the years leading up to 2019 in these Democratic presidential primaries, from the Boston Marathon bomber to the San Bernardino attacks to the mass shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, which is, by the way, only a few hours drive from Miami, Florida, where the debates occurred, and where 49 people were killed, 53 people injured in that mass shooting. The shooter, Omar Mateen, pledged allegiance to ISIS during the actual attack. Yet no mention by the Democratic presidential candidates to radical Islamic terrorism, or even just terrorism generally speaking, when the question was posed, what poses the greatest geopolitical threat to the United States? Instead, we get China and absurdly, climate change. We'll talk more about the 2020 presidential debates when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scarinci Show.
Now, more of Mark Scarinci on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scarinci Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. Thanks for tuning in here on WHP 580 AM and iHeartRadio. Remember to download that iHeartRadio app, and you can listen to the show and all of the music and entertainment and news provided by iHeartRadio anywhere in the world whenever you like. And we're talking today about the 2020 Democratic presidential debates, the first round of debates that occurred in Miami, Florida. We had 2 nights, about 20-some candidates qualified to make the debate. And we're going to go through and we're going to give our impression and a little bit of an analysis and our judgment, so to speak, on which candidates did well, which did not. And I welcome you to call in 717-540-0580 and let me know your thoughts on the Democratic presidential debate. And you're welcome to comment live on Harrisburg 100 Facebook Live or on the Mark Scaringi Facebook, and we'll read your comments on the air. We have a comment from John Taylor. Joe Biden is the greatest threat to a candidate. Thank goodness the Democratic candidates seem to see him as their greatest threat and are seeking to dispatch him as early as possible. And I think John Taylor has hit the nail on the head. Joe Biden is, of course, the former vice president of the United States and multiple-term United States senator who has been in the Senate since, my goodness, the mid-'70s. It seems like Joe Biden has been a politician his entire life, and he is the front runner by every poll that's out there. He has a good lead over the United States Senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, who's typically in second in those polls. And we saw on day two, we saw a couple of his fellow candidates take some real shots at him to try to knock him out. I thought Kamala Harris, the United States Senator from California, did a tremendous job really taking it to Joe Biden. We'll get into that in just a little bit. We're going to try to focus a little bit on day one first, then we'll get right into day two. But I welcome your thoughts and comments on the debate. And we also heard a lot of talk about climate change, LGBT. We heard a lot of talk about abortion, and of course migration, immigration. Those seem to be the most important issues that the candidates wanted to talk about and have included in their various plans that they're running on. But again, as I said, no mention of radical Islamic terrorism or even terrorism in general during the Democratic presidential debates. And I thought, that's an example of how these particular candidates perhaps are a little bit out of touch with the mainstream of America, who believe that that national security and the safety of the American people against terrorism, foreign and domestic, is a very important issue. And to have not a word spoken about it, I think says a lot about this current crop of Democratic presidential candidates and how they're going to have a tough time going up against President Donald Trump in the fall of 2020, who has this issue locked down and really delivers the appropriate message on how he is making America safe again. So, all right, one last general observation before we get into the specifics. And I noticed a lot of the talking heads like Joe Scarborough and from MSNBC, Morning Joe, and others admonished those candidates for not taking on Donald Trump more, for not taking on Donald Trump directly during those presidential debates. And those candidates who did were congratulated by the talking heads for doing so. And I think that's the wrong advice. The Democratic primary is not about Donald Trump. If candidates like Joe Biden focus on attacking Donald Trump, I think that they're going to have a hard time getting through and out of this primary. These candidates need to prove to their fellow Democratic primary voters why those voters should vote for them over all of the other candidates. And you have a crop of very solid Democratic presidential candidates in this race. So they have to compare and contrast themselves against each other. And that's why those candidates who scored significant hits, not on Donald Trump, but on their fellow Democratic candidates, like Julian Castro and Kamala Harris, they were essentially the declared winners by the American people who were watching the debates, because Castro went after Robert Francis Beto O'Rourke, and Kamala Harris went after former Vice President Joe Biden in very direct and impactful ways. And, I learned from my own experience running a statewide campaign in the primary, and I was given accolades from various political blogs and others covering the race for my debate performances, for how well I did during the debates. But none of that got me any votes, or at least enough votes that I needed. And I recall one rather astute political journalist observing that wherever I went on the campaign trail, and went out on the stump and during the debates, I always talked about the opponent in the fall, United States Senator Bob Casey, and gave a strong challenge to him and his record. But I didn't explain to the Republican primary voters why I was the better candidate than the other gentlemen who were running for that same nomination. And that was a flaw in the way I ran that campaign. And that is a flaw in the analysis that we're getting from some of our talking heads on MSNBC and CNN and others who are saying that these candidates should have taken it right at President Trump. No, they need to take each other out because only one's going to win. And that one has to have convinced the majority of Democratic primary voters that they are the one, they're better than all the rest, that they're the one who can take it to Trump in the fall. Okay, so that's general observation that I've made about the Democratic presidential debates. And now let's get into some of the specifics. As we discussed, Julian Castro and Kamala Harris, I think they got it right. They each took on and defeated the appropriate foil, if you will. Castro, the real Hispanic, clobbered Beto, the fake Hispanic, on Beto's signature issue, immigration. And Kamala Harris, she skewered Joe Biden for his opposition to busing to integrate public schools when she herself, a black woman who benefited allegedly from busing. So, as unpleasant as it may be to attack members of one's own party, they've got to do it if they want to win that primary. Does anybody remember the 2016 presidential Republican primary? Did Donald Trump attack his fellow candidates and win? You bet he did. So, and I understand that the single biggest issue, according to Democratic voters, is which candidate can defeat Trump. But again, if you don't win the primary, you don't even get the chance to contest Trump, let alone beat him in the fall. Now, let's start with the first debate, day one, featuring Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, Julian Castro, and our lovable Spanish friend, Robert Francis O'Rourke, a.k.a. Beto. That's a very Irish-sounding Mexican name, by the way. And I must say that the young master Beto got his clock cleaned. His launching into Spanish, or perhaps it was Spanglish, was a little startling for the audience and his fellow contestants. There's a great photo taken of Cory Booker, the United States Senator from New Jersey, standing near him with his eyes wide open, kind of looking askance at him, and the expression on his face is like, what the hell is Beto doing? Is he actually speaking Spanish in his opening line, in his opening answer, and is he going to pull it off? And I think everyone was nervous for him when I was listening to Beto speak Spanish. He's not fluent in Spanish. I don't think any of them are fluent in Spanish. They're proficient, perhaps, but even I was a little nervous for our friend Beto, thinking, does he even know what he's talking about, and is he going to pull it off? Well, apparently he did pull it off, but he's Beto. I mean, he's not Hispanic. It's very strange. He's a rich kid. He's an Irish kid, former frat boy who married into a big liberal moneyed family in Texas, and it just looks so contrived, where he's trying to appear as if he's cool and hip and acting like he's Mexican when he's not. And I think what he succeeded in doing is revealing himself to be fake. He's an Irish kid pretending to be Mexican to get the important Hispanic vote in the Democratic presidential primary, which is so critical to winning that primary. And he's also doing it to get the media attention, because the media love anything and everything Hispanic, because for whatever reason, that's hip and that's cool and that's new. But, in the eyes of every liberal media, every day is Cinco de Mayo Day, by the way. But alas, not for our young Beto. Someone on the debate stage should have said to him, "Hey, Beto, no eres mexicano." But in speaking of Mexicans, Julian Castro, the cat-like, did you ever closely watch him? He looks a little cat-like. The former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under President Obama, he delivered an embarrassing and perhaps devastating blow to Beto. Now, Castro lectured and educated Beto on immigration law. The issue Julian wants to rewrite our criminal law to decriminalize the act of crossing the border. According to Castro, that will eliminate the problem of these Obama cages on the border because the migrants are only in those Obama cages because they have committed a crime under Title 18, United States Criminal Code, by illegally crossing the border. So if we decriminalize it, we don't need the Obama cages anymore, is the argument by Julian Castro. But it was just brilliant to watch Castro explain the law to Beto, who apparently didn't know it. And this is a little striking because Beto is posing as an Hispanic activist, as an activist for migrants. And one would think he would really understand the law. He seemed perplexed. Castro had to point out to Beto his own stated opposition to the reform that Castro was advocating was based upon Beto's apparent ignorance that human trafficking and smuggling are crimes in other sections of the United States Federal Code. So there are still going to be crimes. Human smuggling and trafficking are still going to be crimes, even if we decriminalize illegal border crossing, according to Julian Castro's argument. Beto had no idea. He was stunned. He was clueless. Castro told Beto that he needs to go home and do more homework on this issue. And that to me is a devastating blow to Robert Francis O'Rourke, a very Irish-sounding Hispanic advocate, our young Beto. We'll talk more about the 2020 presidential debate. We've got some callers on the line, so hang on. We're going to get to you when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show.
Let's get back to the Mark Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is the place where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. Today we're talking about the first round of the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination debates, those about 20 candidates who are all vying to be the one who is nominated by the Democratic Party to challenge Donald J. Trump as he tries to get himself reelected president in 2020. And we've given some general observations, and we're going now through who we think the winners and losers are of the debate. And you're welcome to comment live on Facebook or call in 717-540-0580 if you want to do it the old-fashioned way using a telephone, and we'll get you on the radio live. And we've got a comment. I'm going to read a comment, and I want to get to some phone calls. We have a comment on Facebook from Tom Geffers. I still believe the DNC will bring in a more moderate candidate who has some experience in following, maybe a blue dog Democrat. There's plenty of time to do this when Joe Scarborough says he hopes no one watched the debates. Well, let me just say, isn't former Vice President Joe Biden the blue dog Democrat? Didn't Biden establish his blue dog Democrat credentials when he portrayed segregationist senators, James Eastman and a few others who he worked with in the 70s, when he lauded that time period as a time period of civility and essentially congratulated himself for his ability to get along with and work with segregationist United States senators. And I remember when he made those statements, and actually we talked about it last week on the show when I did the show remotely from the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, and we were talking about how Joe Biden was bragging about how he worked with those senators, segregationist senators we know, to get things done. And it turns out, as we talked about on the show last week, what Biden was talking about he got done was his opposition to busing to integrate racially public schools in America. And I thought, boy, Joe probably really stepped on it when he was essentially lauding or coddling segregationist senators for their civility. But he stepped in it again when he was bragging about what he was able to accomplish with them, because the entire Democratic Party is, of course, on the left on the issue of integrating public schools, and we're strong supporters of using government funds, government programs, and actual busing to bus black children into white schools and white children into black schools. And Joe Biden was one of the fiercest opponents to that. Politically, he was responding to the white constituents in the suburbs of Wilmington, who opposed the local government then, forcing them to bus their children into the inner city schools and vice versa. So Biden just stepped into it with both feet on that issue, and Kamala Harris just delivered a devastating blow to him during the second night of the debates. So I want to thank you for that comment, but I think we probably already have our blue dog Democrat in the former vice president. Now, as promised, I want to get to some phone callers. We have Diane from Harrisburg. You're on the Mark Scaringi Show.
Yes, sir. I'd like to comment. You mentioning that the Democrats aren't mentioning anything about the dangers of Islam. And I would say, in general, even the Republicans, everybody's afraid of being called having a phobia, Islamic phobia, and no one is really equipped to know the history. I recently heard someone talk about a book called The Sword and the Scimitar, and it goes back through all the history of Islam and Muhammad and how you got the separation of Shiite Muslims and whatever the other group is called, and all how you got all these different groups, and what their bottom line comes to now is still there are people that are not what we would call radical, but in the Quran it calls for either you believe in Allah or you're an infidel, and we will conquer you. It's not only a religion, but it's also I don't know what you call it, a philosophy.
Right, yeah.
Their goal in general is to take over the world. So if you don't feel comfortable knowing all the history, it's very hard because you don't want to be called, a racist religion, whatever the right word is, that you don't believe in everyone having the right to have different religion. It's much more than that. Number two, I recently heard doctor, previously a senator, Tom Coburn, speaking about his experiences in trying to get rid of waste in our federal government. And he, years ago, and now it's coming to Pennsylvania, has started a movement called the Convention of States.com, and it is part of the Constitution that allows the states to vote to call for a convention of state representatives for very specific purposes that are outlined before the states sign up, and it wants to balance the budget. It wants to put term limits, and I forget the other one, but they're very specific. And now Pennsylvania is actively pursuing to gain these votes from our legislature. So if anybody wants to know how to make America great again...
And I think our listeners do, so that's a very good point.
Yes. So the honest bottom truth is the senator was saying, it's people go to Congress and they might have great intentions, but the way that everything works and the big bureaucracy of the federal government, it's very, very hard to make change.
Diane from Harrisburg, I want to thank you for calling. You raised some excellent points. I appreciate your call. I want to take some other callers and do some commenters from the Facebook accounts. But Diane from Harrisburg is making the point that the whole issue of radical Islamic terrorism was just simply not covered, not even a question asked by the various moderators in the 2 days of the presidential debates for the Democratic Party. And in fact, as we covered during the earlier part of the show, when the question was posed on one of the days, I think it was day one, what is the greatest geopolitical threat to the United States? No one mentioned terrorism, let alone radical Islamic terrorism. So, and as I am opining, I think that's a fundamental flaw in the candidacies of these Democratic presidential candidates. They had better be able to acknowledge that that is a big threat to this country, and they better have some well-formulated and articulated plans for how they're going to combat terrorism to keep America and Americans safe, because the President of the United States has done a terrific job on that front, and we'll be talking about that through Election Day. So these Democrats had better get on the stick, so to speak, and address that important issue, as Diane from Harrisburg is pointing out. Now, you're welcome to call in and comment on who you think the winners and losers were of the Democratic presidential debate, 717-540-0580, or you can comment on Facebook. And we're talking about Julian Castro delivering a strong blow to Robert Francis O'Rourke, basically blasting him for Beto's not understanding basic immigration law. And Julian Castro is now kind of a media darling, so to speak. His profile has been raised a good bit by his strong performance. He did a nice job sticking it to Beto. One part of Julian Castro's performance I found somewhat perplexing, and maybe some of my listeners can point this out to me or answer some of the questions, clear up a little bit of the confusion, if you will. But Julian Castro is very suave, very sophisticated, very articulate, obviously an advocate for Hispanics in America. But he also talked about, he was calling for reproductive justice. And I've heard our liberal and Democratic friends talking about reproductive choice. We all know what that is a euphemism for. But I was a little bit perplexed with this new term, which I haven't heard before, reproductive justice. The justice involved in reproducing. I'm not quite sure what that means. Maybe some of my very wise and astute listeners will know what reproductive justice means. And Julian Castro, he's the former Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development under President Barack Obama. He also talked about abortion rights for transgender and transgender females specifically. And so here is where I'm going to ask my listeners to educate me a little bit on this. This is, what is Julian Castro defending? What is he talking about? Defending the right of men to have abortions. Now, I'm not a doctor or a scientist, but I'm not quite sure why men, I guess transgender females, need the right to abortion. Maybe my listeners can call in and shed some light. You're welcome to call in 717-540-0580. We're going to take a brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show.
Now back to the Mark Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. And thanks for enduring one of the many Scaringi Law commercials during the show. If you have a business, a service, a product, and you like to market your business to our listeners, you're welcome to make some arrangements, and you can do some advertising here on the Mark Scaringi Show. Sometimes the Scaringi Law Firm gets a little tired of being the one of the main advertisers for the show. So we welcome those who want to join in on the fun. Today we're talking about the 2020 presidential debates. The Democrats had 20 contenders, 2 nights, 1 stage in Miami, Florida. And the first round probably went to, in my view, Julian Castro, I think, did a terrific job on day one. How about Elizabeth? I thought Beto O'Rourke really hurt himself on day one. How about Elizabeth Warren? She was the leading candidate on day one, and I think she probably came out okay. She largely mimicked Bernie Sanders' repeated attacks on Wall Street and health insurance companies, corporate America, the rich. I mean, classic kind of Leninist, communist propaganda that we've been listening to since about 1917. Sanders takes it a little bit extreme and appears a little unrattled and unsettled and disheveled and a little threatening and a little scary. Elizabeth Warren, very different, polished, poised, essentially is saying the same thing, but in a way that doesn't scare the bejesus out of the big shots who actually run the Democratic Party, who, by the way, are mainly Wall Street, wealthy corporate executives and the media elite. The same people, Sanders and Warren, are attacking on the stump. Of course, once Warren takes office as president, if she does, she'll reverse course, just like Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton did in all of their years in power. They became champions of Wall Street, champions of big corporations, took massive amounts of money from both. And so I think probably Elizabeth Warren might settle in to the same kind of Clinton-esque way of becoming a part of the system that one runs against. Sanders, I don't think anybody thinks he'll become part of the system. I think that they think he is a true, avowed Marxist-Leninist who will take this country right off the cliff. That's my analysis of the Bernie Elizabeth Warren. I think those two are kind of vying for the same political base in the Democratic Party. I thought Cory Booker, our Spartacus from New Jersey, I thought he had a pretty decent debate. Google Trends, which was tracking in real time what people were searching for during the debate, showed that he got the biggest and most frequent spikes in interest of the major candidates. So whenever Booker started talking, a lot of people were Googling him, and he speaks well and he spoke compellingly. He uses anecdotes, but I'm still not quite sure exactly what it is that Cory Booker stands for, who Cory Booker is, and why he's running for the presidency of the United States. I think I've got it with Elizabeth Warren. I think I've got it with Bernie Sanders. I think I know that Beto O'Rourke is just a confused, perplexed charlatan, so to speak. He's just kind of going through the motions at this point. I think I know why Julian Castro is running. He wants to advance the Hispanic Pan-American agenda, take down the borders, and will become united with Mexico. I get it. I see what he's all about. But Cory Booker, I still can't figure him out. And I will say I thought that Tulsi Gabbard did a very nice job, obviously, on foreign policy. She sounded more like Ron Paul or Rand Paul than any Democratic presidential contender that has spoken on those issues. She presents a real distinction among the other contenders, and I think can carve out a constituency based upon the fact that she is really going after the military and industrial complex and those in both parties who seem to be forever encouraging the United States to go to war anywhere around the world for sometimes reasons that have little or nothing to do with the United States national security interest. But day two, as we've discussed, and I'm interested to hear from my listeners, and I've got some calls lined up, and I'm going to get to you in a second, 717-540-0580. I think night two clearly went to Kamala Harris. I thought that it was her setting up Joe Biden and delivering that punch was just fierce and strong. And you watch Joe Biden. Now, Joe Biden has a tough time in debates in the first place. And I don't know if any of my listeners have ever been in debates, but I've been in many debates over the years. When you run for office, and I ran for statewide office back in 2012, and we had lots of debates. In my experience, debates are easy if you know who you are, if you know what you're all about, if you know why you are running and what you want to accomplish, because you know the answers to the questions before they're asked in most cases. But when you are a career politician like Joe Biden, who's really not in elective office for any compelling reason, he's not there because he wants to put into place some grand new policy vision for how he's going to reform and change America for the better. He's in that position for the power and the prestige that he derives from it. He's a typical career politician who believes in little or anything other than advancing his own career and his own agenda. So it's hard for him in debates because when he gets asked these questions, he's not really sure what to say. He's just kind of following what's trending. And if you watch Joe Biden in that debate on night 2, he's kind of looking around. When they ask those silly questions, those kind of one-line questions, and you're supposed to raise your hand, yes or no, you see Joe Biden hesitant, looking around, seeing what others are doing. He's not quite sure. That's why Biden is very vulnerable in these debates. Plus, he has a very difficult job explaining himself because he just kind of talks all over the place because he's not sure what's the right answer to give. And I think his response to Kamala Harris, he actually started to defend his position on busing. Now, in the mid-'70s, Joe Biden, as a new United States Senator, and we've gone through this before on the last show, he worked very hard to oppose the government forcing and compelling busing to integrate public schools in America. He did it because he received lots of criticism from white suburban constituents in the suburbs of Wilmington when he went to have town hall meetings, and they were all over him saying, Joe Biden, you got to stop this busing. I don't want to have to send my kids into inner city schools in inner city Wilmington, and we don't want the inner city students from Wilmington coming up into the wealthy white suburbs. That's what happened. I mean, I'm sorry if that is a little too blunt, but that's what was going on in the 70s in this whole busing movement. And Joe Biden stood up and loudly and strongly opposed busing to integrate public schools. And he worked with segregationists, like real live old school Democratic segregationist senators from the South, to accomplish his goals. And by the way, they were largely successful. They essentially got the federal government to stop trying to forcibly integrate public schools based upon race. That's Joe Biden's accomplishment from the mid-'70s. Now the Democratic Party is so far in the other direction that he's on the outlier on this issue. And when Kamala Harris takes it to him, I mean, she according to her own biography, was a recipient and benefited from the busing that occurred in her school when she was in elementary school in Berkeley, California. And she just did such a great job of delivering it to Joe Biden on that issue. And then you notice he kind of stammered and was stunned and didn't really have a powerful, forceful response. He tried to defend his record in opposing busing. He tried to split hairs, and he was totally wrong. I mean, he's lying right in front of the American people. Joe Biden was not trying to just carve out one exception to government busing. He was trying to oppose every way the federal government was trying to force busing. The record is very clear. So now he tries to defend his record when the whole party has moved in the entirely different direction on the issue. And then he tries to split hairs, and Kamala just ate him for lunch. This is Joe Biden, ladies and gentlemen, the front runner of the Democratic nomination for the presidency of the United States. He's been in elective office since the mid-'70s. He really doesn't stand for anything other than being glorious, charming, smiling Joe Biden and all of the love that he gets from all of his hugging and all of his empathy and all of that silliness. Maybe he'd make a great therapist, but he's not going to. He doesn't make a great politician, which is why he lost his prior 2 presidential runs, and he was only resurrected by the beneficence of Barack Obama, who has now kept Biden in the national spotlight and put him in the position that he's in now. Well, that's about all the time we have today. I want to apologize to my callers who are in the phone box here. I can't get to you today, but I want to thank you for listening to the Mark Scaringi Show. Tune in here on WHP 580 AM, iHeartRadio,